what do you do in science communication when areas of science disagree with one another? And one of the conversations that's happening at the moment, and I think it's based in maybe this hate speech law, is, for example, conversations around gender. I mean, biology and physiology would say one thing, whereas sociology and psychology would say another thing. All areas of science, in their own way, saying completely the opposite things at times. What do we do? And I'm a Neanderthalic layman. What does someone like me do when you've got these academics and experts and people of high regard and people far smarter than me saying the opposite things and referencing science when they're doing it?
I think this is where the world gets complicated, right?
Yeah,
I mean, in an ideal world, communicating something simple is relatively simple most of the time. But actually, when things get complicated, and this area here is really complicated, right?
We don't need to go into a debate about that conversation.
No, but there are those who say actually it's not complicated; it's quite straightforward. Based, there are different views on it. But I think we have an open and engaging debate, and we recognise that some people have one view, some people have another view. Let's have a public conversation about it. Let's do it in the museums. Let's do it wherever it is we have it. But let's not start not letting people say what they think, because that's.
I love what you're saying, and I agree with you, but I just don't think that's the society we live in. I think, I remember, and I can reference this and stay a little bit away from the controversy, because I was a talkback host in the first decade of this century on News Talk ZB, and there was a lot of conversation around climate change, and global warming. And I would contact groups like Greenpeace and I'd say, come on and debate this with us, because we've got people who think this is not the case. We want to hear all sides. And Greenpeace would say to me, and various other groups as well, we will not debate that. The science is settled, and if we debate it, we're giving weight to the opposition. Now, my response to Greenpeace was, it's really unfair, because you've had the opportunity to go through this to form your opinion. Myself and a group of other people are still on the journey. If you cut the conversation off, how are we going to be able to get where you are? And I think what you're saying about, we're not having a conversation around gender, we're not doing that. But some of these things that are open and honest dialogues in society, it's very difficult, because there is maybe both sides, but certainly a perspective of that goes, we're not having this conversation. If we have it, X, Y, Z will happen, X, Y, Z harms will happen, so we're just not going to have it. So I agree with your sentiment, but I am concerned for the reality of how that would work or wouldn't work in society today.
Yeah, and I think that's a valid concern. I mean, one of the things I would say, and then the challenge here is, I do think, in general, if you have a battle of ideas, and you've got the facts behind you, and there's one of the problems with things like climate change is you'll get the folks who'll nitpick around the edges and not actually miss the bigger picture. Yep. Right. And I'm the opposite, because I'm an astronomer, right? We look at the really big picture. So when I look at the planet Venus and I know there's a runaway greenhouse effect and it's 400 degrees on the surface, I'm worried about the amount of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere. Now, slightly different effect, but similar point. I guess the counterpoint to what you're saying there is, there's the famous episode, I can't remember if it was the Daily Show or something, or Jon Stewart, where they said, look, there are 3 people out of 100, 3 scientists out of 100 have this view. To get a balanced view, you have 97 of,
I remember
and part of the challenge here is the nature of the beast, right? Journalism, you present a balanced picture, but what is balance if, by far the majority of the evidence and the majority of the science suggests that, in fact, human climate change.
But then you come back to this concern about lived experience. If someone's lived experiences in 2005, they listened to News Talk ZB every day, and Leighton Smith was their guide. And I like Leighton. He was a yardstick for talkback, but he certainly convinced a lot of people that climate change is not real. If that was their lived experience, because that was where they got they were the equivalent of a Fox News viewer, then 97-3 doesn't matter, because they don't get that information. And coming back to the conversation we had before, for example, about other conversations going on inside, it's not 97-3. It seems to be very much still, biology and physiology is saying this, sociology and psychology is saying this, and it doesn't seem that there is this overwhelming consensus at the moment. And as I said, I'm being real clear, I don't want to talk about that as an issue, but from a science point of view, when you have these conflicting areas that seem from the outside, and I'm a novice in this, I'm naive to it, to be carrying sort of equal weight, what do we do to figure it out?
Well, I think there's there's evidence. I mean, I guess one of the things about working in a museum is you think about history, and with time, views on certain subjects have evolved. Our view on things like homosexuality has changed significantly in my lifetime. It's in the UK and elsewhere, and that's a good thing, right? The world's changing, and we're all becoming more tolerant in some senses. And I think the hot debate we're having about the issues you referred to at the moment, I think once the debate matures, and once we do come to a consensus, I think we'll all get on and move on, and that's the end of it.
I think you're right, and I think for a long time about that particular debate, which we're not talking about per se, my things have been, I don't feel like we've got the language to actually have that conversation yet. No. And until we agree as a society what the language is, we can't have it in any authentic way.
But I would say also it's really important, and this is where, I talked about Fox News earlier. I do think scientists should go on to Fox News and talk, because even if they're disparaged, even if they're not listened to, getting a chance to engage with that audience that doesn't agree with them is really important.
Yeah.
And similarly on the other side, I mean, you talked about flat earthers. I'd happily sit on a stage with a flat earther and debate the curvature of the Earth. In fact,
dude, let's do it. I did a podcast during lockdown with Mark Sargent, who's like the world's most famous flat earther. We'll get you on. We'll get both of you on. I'm thinking about starting up a debate series as well, like there's a little offshoot of this. Yeah. And maybe we do a flat Earth one. I'll bring you back and we'll do a flat Earth one.
I'd really have to prep my stuff. But the challenge here is actually a little knowledge sometimes goes a long way.
Yep.
And the fact of the matter is, and this isn't being patronised, a lot of people out there don't really know enough about the science to really understand the issues that are concerning. And actually, you said something earlier which I didn't respond to at the time, but sometimes in science things change.
Yeah.
And that unsettles people.
Yeah.
Science isn't always about absolute truth or absolute proof, right?
Well, that's often the difference between science and religion, isn't it? Like you watch these debates all the time between the religious person and the science person, and the science person goes, yeah, we were wrong. We know better now, so we've changed our position. Whereas the religious person often goes, this is the truth from day one. It's always been the truth. It always will be the truth.
Yeah, and I can illustrate that because it's interesting. During my legal studies at the moment, there's a question about what are you sure about and what can you prove? Now, I'm sure that the sun's going to rise tomorrow, right? But actually, as an astronomer, I know that the sun has got a finite lifetime. And at some point in the next 5 billion years, the sun won't rise because it's going to expand. And my lived experience tells me that I'm sure the sun's going to rise tomorrow. But at some point in the future, it won't.
One day someone will say that and they'll be wrong.
And that's the thing about, we're all sure because of our lived experience. Yeah. And actually, we've got to recognise in ourselves that actually being sure isn't necessarily always being right. You can be sure about something and be completely wrong.